And one way to do that is through a situation analysis. Because the healthcare markets are complicated, those of us in the marketing and business world like to use frameworks. So there's a couple of frameworks that we've worked into the presentation today. The first one we'll talk about is the 5C's. And if you go Google 5C's or business case and situation analysis, some people use different C's, and that's okay. These are the C's that I like to use because I think for the work that we do, it's a good way to do it. And the situation analysis gives you more of a macro view of the market that you're in and the landscape that you're working in. So the 5C's, the first one is company. And the question there is, who's developing the product? Who are you? Who are you working with? Who are your partners? Who are you connected to? And what advantages do you have? Do you have the technology? Do you own the IP? Do you know how to make it? Are you able to manufacture it? Are you vertically integrated so that you can produce it, get it out the door, and get it to the patients? The next one I like to cover is the category or climate. So what are the current conditions of the sector that you're in? What's happening in the world? What are people talking about? A good example here is with EpiPens. If you were to launch an epinephrine auto-injector right now, you're going to get a lot of scrutiny. So what's happening in the outside space with regard to the category that you're working in? The next one is the customer. And in healthcare, the customer can take lots of flavors. The customer is usually the person that will pay for the product. So think about the hospital or the clinic that's actually going to approve the payment for the product. But sometimes you want to work the payer into that conversation. But think about like a financial or a business transaction with this person. The consumer, again, for healthcare can vary. But the consumer, a lot of times, is the person that's using the product. It can be a patient, it can be a doctor, it can be a caregiver. So it can be like a mother or a father or a spouse or a good friend who's using the product to help the patient. Nurse, technicians. There's lots of users in the healthcare space. And then the last one is competition. So, and I would recommend you go broad with regard to competition. Who else is making the same kind of thing I am doing? Who is making adjacent things to what I am doing, adjacent products, adjacent types of treatments, types of therapies? And what are other people doing? What kind of research are they doing in that space? What unmet needs are they finding? And how are they defining the market? Learn as much as you can from the other organizations. One of the tips on your pages is to, for public companies, is to look at the annual reports. A lot of times they'll give you an overview of what they're working on, what they think is important right now, because they're required to by law. So it's public information. Take advantage of it. What I'd like to do is go through an example. This is a real-world example that I heard of recently to kind of give you a sense of how this works. I was made aware of this novel. Here, this is the jargon that I pointed to Cheryl's on 2 pages, or 2 in the title. Novel POC allergy tests, or PCPs. So it's novel point of care allergy test for primary care physicians. So an organization had an idea. It was a microfluidics company, and they had the ability to test small volumes of sample for allergy testing. And you've heard a lot about microfluidics and small volumes of testing with Theranos in the news lately, so I'm sure you're familiar with that space. But on the surface, it sounds like a great idea. Small volumes of sample, bringing the testing to primary care physicians. So when you go in for your annual checkups or you see your doctor that you're very familiar with, do the allergy testing right there. They get it taken care of. You have that relationship with them. It's all good. They can help you interpret the results. Sounds like on the surface, it sounds like a good idea. But let's go through the C's and see what happens in this situation. So from a company perspective, it's a microfluidics company. They have that expertise. They have experience in healthcare. They know how to test small volumes. They know how to make the equipment. They know how to run the reagents through. Check. Category and climate. There's a high interest in microfluidics right now. There's been a lot of work done in the healthcare space and in the popular press, people are talking a lot about it. There's a need for point-of-care testing. There's a need for being able to decrease the time from a diagnosis or a suspected diagnosis to providing some useful information to the patients. So we get a check here as well. On the customer, payers are interested in reducing the need for specialists. So if I can pay my primary care physicians their standard fee, which is generally less expensive than the specialists, I would prefer that. Let me pay my general pediatrician or my general physician to do this test versus sending to a specialist, which incurs additional costs from the test, from the time with the clinician. So they get a check on this box here. From the consumer perspective, primary care physicians are not prepared to perform allergy testing. And there's a lot in that statement, so I'll take a minute there. They're not trained in diagnosing allergies. They haven't the experience of interpreting diagnostic testing to say if someone is allergic or not. They have, in the past, forwarded their patients to their friend who they went to medical school with, and they like to be able to continue to refer patients to for the clinic across the hall or across town because they have a good working relationship. The clinic itself is not approved to have a diagnostic test in the facility. So there's a CLIA certification is a certification that you're required to have in order to have a diagnostic test facility in your office. If you don't have the certification, you don't have a way to run these tests. You don't have a room to put the box that you have to put on a counter to run the test. You don't have a technician that is skilled in running tests. So you see, like, there are lots of questions that you need to ask from the primary care physician to see how is this going to affect their cultural climate, their clinical culture, and what's going to happen for them that's going to be different than what's happening today. And maybe on the surface, we give them an X because of all those questions that I posed, but you do some research and you say, well, you know what? These initially were barriers, but if we make these few changes, we can overcome these barriers and it's still a good idea. So just because you get an X doesn't mean you can't move forward. It's just there's some more work to be done. And then on the competition side, your competition is really the well-trained, experienced allergy clinics with trained physicians, trained nursing staff, trained diagnostic testing staff that know how to do this already. And so you're essentially taking work away from them. And so what are they going to say about it? At the next national conference on allergies, because there's a national conference on everything, right? The next conference, are they going to support this technology, or are they going to come up with reasons why this is not good for patients? So what's the dynamic that fits into that situation as well? So the result of this is the company had to reevaluate their position and decide if they were going to move forward. Because of these barriers that came up in the conversation, you really need to determine if these problems are insurmountable or if it's something that you can overcome.